Katie, I'd like you to kind of take point on this because I've talked to you less about it. Just how the experience what it's been like for you, not just being there, but the whole journey, I guess, here to there and then back again. Like any of that you want to unpack, I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, so the whole thing kind of just forces you to let go, I guess is the simple way to say it. So you say starting from going here to there, I never left home. When most people, they graduate high school and they go off to college and then they come back or they move on to somewhere else.
Right.
I never did that. I was born and raised in Anchorage. I stayed in Anchorage for college. The farthest I'd gotten was Girdwood for a few years before we left to teach. Mm-hmm. But I had never left home and was never living more than an hour from the childhood home that I had been in since I was 2 years old. And when we left, I had to pack up our house and pack up my classroom. And my parents sold that childhood home and moved 2 weeks before I left. So I was also packing up everything from my entire life, basically, like the entire duration of my life.
Right.
And there was a mantra that was on a little block in the yoga shack in Girdwood that I would go to frequently that I really kept coming back to, which was, you can only lose those things which you cling to. And so I spent a lot of time mentally preparing myself for what kind of person do I think I am, and what kinds of things would that person mentally cling to? Okay. What is important enough that I need to still cling on to it? And reevaluating what home needed to be to me. And so I was lucky enough that I wasn't going on this journey alone. And so before I left, I told myself, home is wherever my husband is, wherever we are making a home together.
Okay.
And that kind of helped me let go of all of those things here that have always been part of my comfort zone. And there were many times that I needed to come back to that mantra over there as well. There was one time as we were finishing, when you arrive, you spend a few months doing training, and then you get sworn in at the end of that, and you become an official volunteer, and then they send you off to your site where you're going to live for a couple of years. Okay. And so when you reach the end of training, you then have to go out to the market and buy all the stuff that you need to survive. You need a mattress, and you need cooking supplies and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I was responsible for going out and getting the mattress while Josh was doing other things. And I had in my mind what I wanted because I had heard from volunteers who were there previously that that's what they had and that was the best thing to get. Okay. And then I went to the store and they said, you can't get that outside of the Capitol. You're not going to find that here. You need to just accept that. Here's what you can have instead. And I ended up paying a lot more money than I wanted to for something that wasn't actually what I wanted. But I had accepted that because I was told you can't get the thing you actually want.
Okay.
And
There's
then
a song about that.
Can't always get what you want.
Yeah.
That was one of my mother's favorite things to tell me when I was a child. But anyway, so then I get back to the meeting point and I'm talking to other volunteers, and there are other volunteers who have found exactly what I did want and was told did not exist.
Oh, okay. And
I had all of this frustration over the fact that I had just wasted a ton of money, because over there, $100 is a huge sum of money, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, oh my God, I just put down all of this money on something that was not what we wanted. And now I no longer have that money if I wanted to go and get that thing that we actually did want. Mm-hmm. And I was so mad, and I just stormed off. Like, I just needed some time to walk it off. And I'm like furiously power walking. For anyone who knows me, I walk ridiculously fast. So I'm like furiously power walking around the market, like trying to just get out of my head. And after a little while, I worked through it, and I came back, and met up with the other volunteers again, and they were like, "Are you okay?" Because that was kind of intense. And they understood my frustration, and I explained, I was like, "I'm okay now. I just needed some time to remind myself." And I came back to that mantra again, you only lose what you cling to. And I was like, am I really the person who clings to money? Is that who I want to be? Absolutely not. Like, this is stupid. Yeah, it's frustrating. I just wasted a bunch of money, but should that affect me going forward? No. There's no reason to include that negativity in my life.
Wow.
So I have gotten better at letting go of things like that and just forcing myself to reevaluate. And I think a lot of us do that throughout our lives at different points when we're kind of forced to, or like we have a day that's a little calmer and we're not wrapped up in all of the day-to-day minutia of living in the West. And we're like, oh, this is nice. And you kind of appreciate the small things in life. Right. But I think that typically as Americans, we do that periodically. We don't do that on a daily basis necessarily. And so I've gotten better at incorporating that into my daily routine. Like when something comes up, it's easier for me to think about, is this actually important? Do I actually need to be upset about this? To give an example, the other day, there was this awful smell in my classroom. One of the students must have had spoiled milk or something gross spilled on their backpack or their jacket. Because it was fine when it was just me in the morning, and then as soon as the students came in, the scent just wafted through the room and then got progressively worse throughout the day. And I'm just ignoring it and going about my daily routine. But then it started reaching to the hallway. And so then I had other staff members coming in and making comments about it. And I'm trying to be patient with that because I'm trying to work on other things when they keep coming in to talk to me about this thing that I'm like, this isn't a big deal. But it was just funny that like they needed to comment on it and tell me their own stories of awful smells in their classroom and what they thought the cause might be and et cetera, et cetera. And then they would get to the end of their spiel and I'd be like, okay, but I just lived in Africa for 2 years. Like, if this is the worst thing that happens today, I'm good. Like, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Like, this isn't something that I need to take time out of my day to notice or acknowledge.
Right on.
It was for other people.
Got it.
But for me, I'm like, well, I'm busy trying to help students learn this concept today. So that's what I was focused on. Right. And I have had an easier time prioritizing my thoughts on the things that are going to be most impactful for my day or long term or whatever.
Right.
And I have gained a lot of patience, in dealing with students. There are things that they do that I used to get very frustrated with, and it's easier for me now to just like breathe and let it go. The Liberians always say, let it be so. That's like my favorite expression now. When there's something that I can't do anything about, just let it be so. And then we talked a little earlier about lack of control. You become better at accepting your lack of control purely because you're forced to. Like, you would go crazy over there if you couldn't let go of the things that you can't control. And I think before going, I would be conscientious about doing that with small things, but now I do it with big things too. Like the idea of getting in a car that is a certain amount of risk because the roads aren't safe and the vehicles aren't safe and the drivers aren't safe and all of that. And before, I would have been that person who just like felt anxious about it the entire time, even though there's nothing I could be doing to prevent that risk, right? Okay. And now I'm just like, well, can't do anything about it. And I focus on other things. Okay. Yeah. So I've gotten better about ignoring those big things as well as the small things that I can't control.
Well, that let it be so. Would you say it's similar to our "it is what it is" type of mentality? Okay.
Yep. It is what it is.
Oh, so that's a whole nother conversation. We can have a whole nother hour talk about breaking down the local colloquy and how they speak in allegory. A lot of their sayings. You can unpack a lot of their sayings that have a lot of meaning in a few words.
You like what? Give me at least one good one.
A lot of times it's a conversational, so I don't know.
I'm still in flight.
Okay. That's a good one. So one of my favorite ones was I was in a meeting with a principal, or we were having a staff meeting, and one of the teachers was talking, and I thought he had stopped talking, and so I started to speak myself, and he goes, "My man, in flight. I have not yet landed."
Okay.
And so like
right
I'm talking, it's
I
pretty.
need more time to get to the point.
And a lot of times they make absolute sense. Like it's just like, oh, okay, like now I can't even think.
My man.
So
That's real common. My man.
Yeah.
Is really common.
there were a couple that were used in school settings for me. So there was one time we were in the teacher training college that I was at. We were talking about preparing for an assessment and what you should do to prepare yourself.
Okay.
And the instructor was telling the trainees, the fingers are not all equal. Like your fingers are different lengths, right?
Right.
Meaning we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So be aware of your own and focus on those things that you most need to work on to prepare yourself for the test.
Wow.
The other one that always cracked me up, my first job was teaching, but then training the teachers at my school to teach the same thing that I was doing. And so there was a point where I had trained them and needed to step back and let them be the ones leading the class. And my principal, each time he was the one doing that, he would get up and tell the students, okay, you will listen closely, be attentive. There's a new driver in the car. So basically, like, things aren't going to quite go as you're used to because there's a new person directing this now. Bear with me.
New driver in the car. Got it.
Yeah.
No.
Cool. Yeah. Wow. What about, okay, so it sounds to me, Katie, that, I mean, your journey started before you even left in the sense of your home and getting all packed up. And so you like started on a deep emotional journey before you even left. Did you feel like you were aware of some of that process when that started? Like, oh gosh, I'm leaving like everything. How did that feel? Just, yeah.
Overwhelming.
Okay.
There were a lot of times when people would tell me, oh my gosh, we're so excited for you guys are going to have such an amazing experience. And I was still wrapped up in the fact that I was trying to enjoy this rainy day because I knew it was cool and I knew I wasn't going to have another cool day for a while. So yeah, there were a lot of times that it was just overwhelming to think about how I needed to be prepared for this experience that I didn't really know how to prepare for. And I was just kind of trying to figure that out as I went and take advice of people that I knew who had done similar things. I am lucky that I knew some, we say RPCVs, returned Peace Corps volunteers who have completed their service. And so I had heard anecdotes about their experience and their service and I'm one of those people who like always wants to learn from other people's experience before I try doing something.
Right.
So I tried to gather as much information about that as possible. There was a Facebook group for those of us who were going to ask questions of volunteers who had already been there for a year. And so I tried to glean as much information as possible from them to be able to prepare myself. And I threw a lot of that energy into packing. That was kind of my way of like taking the overwhelmed feelings and just focusing it on something specific. Like I knew that they had told me that this kind of shoe was really helpful. So I was going to go find those shoes and get a pro deal on them or whatever it was. And I'm the type of person who packs for a trip 2 weeks in advance. So packing for 2 years of my life started like 6 months in advance. And I would just periodically, I did the same thing when we came back, actually. I started packing months in advance with the stuff that I knew I wouldn't need until I got there. And just had a bag in a storage space in the house where I would go start putting things in. And then every couple of weeks, I would have a few more items that were ready and I would go rearrange things. And that was kind of my way of physically organizing my mental process that I was going through.
Okay. What do you think? The process of just getting there and the transition.
We're very different philosophies.
Yeah, I'm definitely a...
Figure it out when I get there was always his saying.
Yeah, definitely more of just wanted to get there and start learning. So I really didn't really take in a lot of the, I don't know, not I didn't have the same emotions as she had. Like she said, you know, I've I moved, I grew up in Kansas. Coming up here, you kind of learn how to let go of that. You know, when you do leave the nest when you graduate high school, leave the nest. Mm-hmm. Coming up to Alaska and kind of rebuilding a life, you learn some skills, emotional skills, so
Right.
I didn't quite have the same experience in that way. And so for me, it's more about like trying to be patient and understanding like what she's going through because she hasn't done that before.
Right.
So for me, it's more of a supportive role, getting to that moment. As far as like once we got over there, yeah, it was definitely more like I'll roll with the punches, as they say, and just try to figure it out as we go.
One thing that's representative of that difference is that I did a lot of reading about Liberia before I left. I tried to find every book I could that a Liberian had written about Liberia. And I would offer them to him, and he was like, nope, he wanted to go over there clean slate. Whereas I wanted to go over there with some idea of what to expect. He just wanted to get into the situation and then adapt to it when he arrived.
Because to me, like, the way I looked at it was, if I have all these preconceived notions about what to expect when I go over there, like I already have this false premise that I'm operating on when I hit the ground. Like I wanted to hit the ground and develop my own ideas. And then I went back and read everything that she read because you have lots of time to do that. But I wanted to go over there with an open mind on everything and not have any, which, obviously like you have you have preconceived notions of developing world in general in the back of your mind, and even in Africa, like we've all seen the CNN footage of during Civil War strife, like you have these like generalities and that kind of thing. You can't really avoid that, if you've grown up in the last 20 years, with the kind of culture that we have in America. So you have some preconceived notion, but as far as like Liberia as its own entity, they had a civil war and they had the Ebola crisis in 2014. That's all I knew. Mm-hmm. But other than that, like the history, you had some vague understanding of the history, but yeah, I didn't go down the deep understanding or try to understand what I was getting into. More of, I wanted to figure it out as I was, learning, like learn on the ground from the people themselves. Right. And then go back. I went back and it did help going back and reading those books that she had read previously, and even watching a couple documentaries about things that had happened to Liberia, that historical context, the Civil War, the current cultural trends, all that, definitely helped fill in some blanks for understanding what I was experiencing, on the ground in the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
But definitely I enjoyed the process. My process is different, so I definitely enjoyed more of the getting to know people, and then so you're starting at instead of starting at the macro view, I enjoy starting the individual view and then going out from there. Okay. Because then you hear stories. People are always telling you stories about their life, and especially most recent, the Ebola, and then the Ebola crisis, and then Civil War stories. War stories were very common. Okay. And it's not like it comes up a lot, but when you get to know someone really well, those stories come naturally because it's such a huge part of their life. Mm-hmm. Telling those stories of the craziness that happened to those people, and the one, and the fact that they survived, and because typically they all watch someone die,
right,
or many someone's,
or many someone's, or So those stories were very. So I didn't want to go in. I did not want to go into a country with the images of the Civil War in my mind. Because you can watch documentaries, you can see some of this stuff. Even go to YouTube and you can Google the Liberian Civil War, or even the post-Civil War crisis. Vice News has a documentary about Liberia. Okay. And you watch those things, and then you're going over there, so you have those images in the back of your mind when you're meeting these people and visiting this place for the first time. I didn't think that was healthy for me.
Right.
because I definitely have a tendency to dwell on like negative emotions, and so if I have this civil strife, conflict, violence, that stuff's already in the back of my mind when I go over there. Like that's going to affect how I build my relationships. So for me, it was better to build those relationships, and then get to know the people that experience these things from their eyes, and then I could go out and then look at read these books, look at these documentaries to kind of get the macro view of like what the outside world perceived happened.
Sure.
And so then I could have questions that could come back and get better understanding from people that were in those zones.
Right.
So a lot of times there was active footage from war zones or areas in Liberia that were filmed during the war. Mm-hmm. We know people that were in that area at that time.
Okay. Right.
That hell, their families could have been in some of those videos, could have been recorded.
Right.
Our first site where we were in Liberia was right in the middle. I mean, was the heaviest hit. Okay. I mean, the village that Katy taught at was completely destroyed. I think there's like 3 walls and 3 walls of a shower and a toilet. That was all that left of this whole village.
Whoa.
Complete.
One wall of the school survived.
One wall of the school. Mm. You had rebel you had more than one rebel faction. You had the government soldiers from the AFL, what was it?
Armed Forces of Liberia.
Armed Forces of Liberia. That's what I can't remember what the A was. So, for me, it was better to have an open mind going in, and rather than filling it with all this negative emotion, the negativity that comes to a place like that, and then build up, know the people, and then get it to know the history.
Right.
Whereas for me, he talked about how you can't avoid having some preconceived notions because of the images that we are shown or the small things that do make it over here. Mm-hmm. So I think my thought process was that I knew I was going in with some preconceived notions one way or the other. Okay. And I wanted that to be based on Liberians telling their stories to me in print rather than whatever Western media things I had picked up on. I just thought that I would get more of a direct... Mm-hmm. If I was going to have some kind of notion to begin with, it might as well be coming directly from the people, right, rather than outside observers.
Sure.
So, and I also went back and reread a lot of those same things after we had arrived and I'd been there for a while. And you have this entirely different take on things once you have actually gotten to know a lot of people who had those experiences.
And the places and like what they're talking about, because Liberia is not a big country, so... Right. You've actually been to the places described in the book.
Yeah,
sure.
So like they're
in the type of people, in the culture, in the tribes. Like you actually know those places and people. So
yeah, One of the books that had a really strong impact on me before we left. I remember Josh reading it a few months after we got there, and he's talking about, this was at Tubmanburg Junction. I had completely forgotten that because that name meant nothing to me when I read it the first time. Right. And so then I was eager to go back and read it again and be reminded of all of that because to me it was all stories disconnected from a location that I would be familiar with.
Contextual knowledge.
Yeah, and then it became something very familiar.
I mean, honestly, I think it's just up to the individual, like how you choose to deal with something like that. I mean, in hindsight, maybe I should have read more about the culture and the colloquialisms and get a better idea of like where I was going, but I don't know. For me, it was I enjoyed the idea of like just getting dropped in fresh and not knowing anything. I don't know, that somehow was appealing to me.
And he was very much in the majority. Most of the other volunteers had not read a lot like I had. They were going into it fresh like him.
Okay.
But I think it's also the difference in personality. Like, you're kind of a control freak, so you want to have as much knowledge and control. Sure. And that wasn't a negative comment. That was just, that's a personality
absolutely
trait.
My personality.
And I'm definitely more of a, like I said, roll with the punches and adapt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and we kind of complimented each other once we got over there, so it worked in our favor.
Absolutely, I can see that from the start of you explaining it. I could see how that would make a great team. That one of you didn't read and another one did. I think that's perfect. And I think it's super cool that your mantra about letting go or what was the other thing you said about control?
Let it be so.
Let it be so. Like the things that have seemingly changed you the most are also the things that seem to butt right up against your natural way of existing in the world. And so that's super, super cool to me. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, it makes sense, right? Because the things that are going to change you are the things that challenge you. Mm-hmm. So if those aspects of the experience that forces you to adapt, to change, to be able to survive, and that's kind of what we were talking about yesterday, coping strategies. There's a lot of, you have to develop, you can't just, there's a lot of people that like to go through the world like a bull in a china shop, just head first, head down, brute force, Mm-hmm. I think a lot of survival over there is you have to learn to ride the current. Sometimes if you fight the current, you're going to drown. But if you learn how to, you can swim with the current, cross the current, right? You can get to shore. You can deal with your issues.
Sure.
So learning how to navigate, those emotional states and developing healthy coping strategies with the chronic stress, the culture shock of being in such a different place, and especially with a place that treats people differently. You have to adapt those strategies to be successful. And if you don't, you either develop very poor strategies that are either have negative health implications or negative social implications. They make your service harder, or they end up maybe driving you don't make it because you haven't developed those strategies of dealing with those stresses.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great lesson because here in America, we have such a varied culture that you can get around a lot of those stresses. I mean, you can find them for sure, but you there's all kinds of different outlets, and over there you only have so many options of how you take out your stress or how you deal with your being uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah. And even the healthy coping mechanisms that we have as Americans are not culturally accepted over there. So,
for example,
we had volunteers who like to run. They are used to going for a run every day, and that's how they release stress. That's weird to Liberians, right? So,
a lot of people.
Yeah, and you...
especially when you leave the city.
If you still want to do it, you absolutely can, but you just know that means you're going to also deal with a lot of teasing and what do you do? And in the case of female volunteers, a lot of harassment because you're running around in shorts.
Right.
So, yeah, you can still do it, but because of the cultural differences, it's not going to be easy to do it. It's going to add an additional layer of something you have to deal with. Another example is that a lot of us are naturally introverted, and so we recharge by just needing some alone time in our house. And whether that's
uncommon.
Meditation or yoga or just sitting quietly and reading a book or whatever, Liberians are extremely social. If someone is alone, it's, wow, you're isolated. There must be something terribly wrong. You must be very sick.
Or you're sad.
Yeah, you are depressed and we need to come and help you. And so to be able to give yourself that space, you have to go to a lot of effort to explain to everyone around you that I'm sometimes going to do that and I promise I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And you will see me again and you don't need to come and check on me while I'm doing that. It's helpful for me to have alone time. Mm-hmm. Because they're concerned. They want to help you. They want to make sure you're okay. They adopt us.
Right.
So, yeah, to carve out those spaces for healthy coping mechanisms, you also have to put in some extra effort as well to make it not weird or it's still going to be weird, but to make it accepted by the people around you.
Very cool. Was and something I always reflect on because thinking back about a lot of our, what we're talking about, what we're calling stressful situations and, kind of this chronic stressor situation, I guess. Mm-hmm. It doesn't sound that bad. You're from the outsider, listening or talking to people who have gone through these experiences. It doesn't sound like it should be that difficult, but it's, I thought the same thing. And it was definitely towards the end of my service, after a year and a half when I I finally reached my limit. Like and when I say reach my limit, I finally, like, I thought I could deal with the chronic, harassment, the chronic, like the fatigue of always trying to fit into a different culture that is outside of your, what we're not used to, outside our different culture. And it's amazing what you think you can go through. And, a lot of people go through more than others. But then when you do reach that limit, even though you thought it shouldn't be a big deal, like, you discover that about yourself. Like, you do have, it's not weakness isn't the right word, but some type of limitation of what you're capable of handling. It's like the difference between was it I think of the Chinese water torture, that drip 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 drip. Right, like you think, when you think about it, like, oh, that shouldn't be that bad, but then after 2 years of drip 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 drip, sometimes you're surprised, like, what you can handle psychologically if you don't build up that tolerance and don't work on being able to handle it.
You end up snapping at something small.
Yeah, and that's like that's the detrimental side. Like when you lose control and you snap and you say, and usually you snap, like we took out a lot on each other, sometimes on neighbors and whatnot. Situations that should have been handled differently. You lose your composure because it's something that's so frustrating, and communication is frustrating. The difference in culture is frustrating, and those frustrations finally boil up, and you've reached your limit sometimes. And it was surprising to me how much more difficult that part was, because I didn't think that was going to be the hard part.
Sure.
I thought that would be relatively easy.
They tell you during training that service will be hard, and there is no way for you to predict in what way it's going to be hard, because it is different for everyone, and it is frequently something that you did not expect. And that is very true. Every volunteer who has served will tell you that bears true, no matter who you are or where you're serving.
Everyone finds their own limits, and you recognize that about yourself. And the thing I keep forgetting is we're talking around it, but one of the mantras that we had in our training was you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That was the mantra. Be comfortable, or get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable comes in all kinds of different, situations, and uncomfortable isn't, except, if someone's threatening you, that's not acceptable situation. But if someone's beating your neighbor's child, you can't intervene. Or you shouldn't intervene.
You shouldn't directly intervene.
You shouldn't directly intervene because it's outside your place. Right. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that you have no power in that situation.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's not comfortable for us as Westerners. We're used to having, if we see something done wrong, we very much get in each other's business. That's one of the we're very good at. If you see something your neighbor's doing that's against the law, you typically you will turn them in. A lot of times, anyways.
Right.
Or you like to believe, at least, that you would not be a bystander in a bad situation. Right. But if you saw someone being attacked, you would be an upstander and try to do something about it.
Right, yeah. And that's that is a cultural difference, because people, if someone's getting mugged on the street, everyone will just sit there and watch. Like, that's fairly common.
Wow.
That kind of thing. Being a bystander is common, and not taking action to intervene in a situation that doesn't concern you. Even though that happens a lot, I feel like that's a human thing, though.
That happens, yeah. That happens anywhere.
That's like the more people that get together, the less you have connection with each other. Like, you think of like a New York subway or something, like where lots of people are together, and
sure.
It's like, oh, that's not my business. But I guess that's more of a human thing.
Yeah.
But definitely, like the interpersonal relationships are the ones that you have to let go of your power, because your best, and it's happened a lot. Like, someone's best friend, especially with women, have their best friend is maybe they're getting beaten at home by their husband, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that. There's just not, because it's not your place, and a lot of times it might even be culturally accepted. So,
right,
yeah.
I like the saying, "Get comfortable being uncomfortable."
It's a good saying for life. It really is.
And it goes for smaller social things too, like stuff that we think of as socially awkward that just makes us squirm internally. You gotta just sit. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
They have sitting in silence is a norm. Just like that's spending time with someone.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you don't have something to talk about because there's nothing new going on.
There's definitely not a
But
thing.
you just sit quietly with that person. And that's hard for us. A lot of Americans, that's an awkward silence, right?
Right, there's no
But
such thing
it
as
doesn't have to
awkward
be.
silences over there. Like sometimes you're just sitting there, and then after an hour, maybe a comment here or there, and then it's like, oh well, I reach into the house.
Right.
I'm going.
Well, what?
I reach into the house. Like I reach in. I'm so reach. Okay, so there's another like
Reaching is going.
Like if I'm reaching to go there. So I reach, like if I'm going to the neighbor's house, I reach into so and so's house.
Okay.
So and if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. I'm going there, and we would say I am going to wherever,
Right.
but I'm reaching there because you reach for it.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another one of those like
Interesting.
one of those colloquialisms that
Colloquialism.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When you think about I reaching to go, or I reach, I go and come back.
Yeah. I will go come.
I go come.
It's like, I need to go grab something from the house. I'll be right back.
I like that.
Well, there's a lot of them that we
That's
really
cool.
like. There's a lot of them that we really like. Sadly, they're like slowly disappearing. Even it's been 6 months.
Every
now,
once in a while, another will pop up again.
Oh yeah, it's definitely ingrained a little bit, but I'm definitely losing. And like when you ask me, like I used to be able to name a bunch of them, but a lot of times it comes up in conversation too. Like you would know when to say that thing.
It'll come organically. I can't do it on the spot.
Yeah, and then like think of a list of things that you can say. Like, oh, well, that's a good bunch of crap.
Yeah, when I was talking to Josh at lunch the other day, he was telling a story about one of the students who made a comment about a teacher, and
about the kid that's now friends with me on Facebook.
And so Josh was quoting kind of the whole situation, how he was speaking to the kid, and his English changed to what I assume is the Liberian version.
Yeah,
Liberian English.
You code switch.
And
It's hard to not do it either.
It's super cool though. Like, I enjoy hearing him do it, So, yeah.
I do that in random times. At home the other day, I went to put something in the recycling, and the box was not where I expected it to be. And
in that
out of
moment.
nowhere, I'm like, what happened? The box come and go.
Yeah. There we go.
And then I was like, why did I just say that?
Oh, that's great.
Box come,
I love that. I absolutely love that. That's
Well,
cool.
it is fun. And you know what we should do sometime? Now, I just thought of this. I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier. We can have a conversation with my friend from Liberia.
Oh, yeah.
I just thought of that. I just thought we should do that.
That'd be awesome.
It'll be interesting to have you listen to him and see how much you can pick up.
See if you can understand.
And he's actually like he's a principal, so he's
very well educated.
he's
for
very well
Liberian.
spoken, and his wife is a clerk in a court, so they're in Liberian standards. They're very much like upper middle class, even though he himself came from typical poverty, and he survived the war by escaping the war. But he'd be great to talk to, and we can get into more of that colloquy. It is fun to but what made me think of that is like I still get to practice with him, even though I find myself like, I'm in America now, I'm gonna make you speak standard English. I like I remember that back and forth, like I was like, I'm in America now, so now I'm gonna make you speak more standard English when we're talking to each other. But I enjoy speaking colloquial when I can, so because it's it just a lot of times it makes sense, and it's just fun. It's like it's just little sayings that. There's no reason why they couldn't even be used over here, really.
Right. I mean, we see this in language all the time, even in our own.
Well, we're always changing anyways.
Anchorage neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Where you can sit at a table with 3 different people, and we can pick up on what it is to talk the same language,
right?
But we may decide to gravitate for whatever reason towards one person's specific.
And that interesting.
You know what I mean?
I definitely noticed that too.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, that's what we talked about earlier, like the whole code switching thing. Like you try to speak in a way that you think is relative to everyone else, even though that's maybe not how you speak in your own house.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Like she code switches when she talks around her parents, and I get a kick out of it.
I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely speak more country boy when I'm around my parents.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shoot, I forgot what I was. Never mind.
Talking about code switching and what was it before that?
It was something along those lines, but I lost it.
Sorry.
It's okay.
What's one experience, Katie, that you feel like you'll never forget, or has like been so impactful that you could just imagine, like in 20 years or more, like just still having that experience?
So the
Good or bad? It doesn't have.
You're gonna make her cry. That's what's gonna happen.
No, the biggest takeaways that I had were people.
For sure.
So the things that I will probably still be thinking about 20 years from now are individual memories with people that I became close with. Let's see. So I have she wasn't my student, but was a student of the volunteer who had been in the area before us. And I got paired with her when we were moved there to go to a training together. And then she ended up becoming my best friend and counterpart who I would work with on things. And she, like I said, had worked with the volunteer before us. And so she had a little bit of experience. And then I continued to work with her, leading a girls' club and doing some different trainings and things, and taking her to additional trainings that Peace Corps would put on so that she could get more experience and knowledge. Mm-hmm. And watching her growth was incredible. And I didn't even get to see her at the starting point. I would hear from other volunteers who had been in the area before I got there about how, they had seen her go to her first training, and then what a difference it was to see her suddenly leading trainings. Mm-hmm. And there were moments that I was just in awe of her confidence. Liberian culture is very much hierarchical, so students are not expected to challenge teachers or administrators or authority figures at all. They are expected to listen and gain wisdom from them, right? Okay. Whereas here, even though we are required to have a certain amount of respect for our teachers, there's also this acknowledgement that we have a mutual learning experience, right? I still learn things from my small students.
And American culture is all about challenging authority. That's what our country's founded on, was we challenge the ultimate authority over us.
So there's
but
there's this acceptance that even if you are not the person in the position of power, the person in the position of power might still be able to learn something from you, right? And that's not as common in Liberia. It's expected that the one who has the title is the one with the things that the other person should be learning.
Whether they know anything or not.
And so there was a period about 6 months after I had met her when we had a training happening, and I invited her to come, and Peace Corps said, we would love to have some of the students help in leading these sessions in the training. Mm-hmm. And obviously I was like, she's great, she should lead something. So I had already, before they told me that, selected the one that I was going to help with. And so I just showed her the materials and what we were going to do. It wasn't until the morning of that I realized it was going to be a breakout session where all of the other students were in a different room doing something different. And this was the breakout session for the teachers and principals that I had just put a student in charge of.
Okay.
And I realized this, but we were in the middle of something, and so I wasn't able to say anything to her. I then forgot to mention it until like 5 or 10 minutes before we walked into the room. We took a quick break before it started, and I said, hey, by the way, I don't know if you realized we're talking to the administrators.
The boss people.
Did not faze her one bit. Any other student would have choked and been like, oh my gosh, I don't think I should do that. This isn't my place, right? She did not hesitate. She was like, okay. And we went in and we did it. And I did my best. as Josh said, I'm a control freak. It's part of being a teacher is good for that because you have control over your little classroom environment, right? And it's very difficult to let someone else be in charge of it and just step back and let them do their thing without trying to jump in and rescue them. I did everything I could to control myself and just stay out of it and let her lead. And she did amazingly. She not only followed all of the stuff she was supposed to do, she improvised when she saw an opportunity to go more in depth with her own story about something or whatever it was. She adapted to the needs of the group. There was a point where we were starting to get a little bit off track. And so I jumped in for a moment and said something to redirect, and she like picked it up and ran with it. And it was just amazing to see this student who I knew a year earlier was sitting on the other side of the training, learning all of these things for the first time and feeling very shy. And now she felt confident not only getting up in front of a group of peers, but in front of a group of people who would normally be considered more powerful than her. And I got so many compliments from other volunteers after that about how impressed they were with her, and thanking me for having brought her and given her that opportunity. So watching that personal growth and just watching her be able to do that felt amazing, that I had the opportunity to know her and work with her. That
So
was
cool.
One of the highlights of our service, and helped me. One of the things about my global perspective that has changed is that I now have a much deeper belief in depth versus breadth. So like, instead of inviting 3 schools worth of students to come to this one training and then moving on, I find it more worthwhile to find that one person like I did and take her to multiple trainings and help her develop over time, because she then becomes a much more sustainable leader in that community when I walk away.
That's it.
Whereas if I had 300 students who all got a little bit of information but are maybe not the type of person who are ever going to do anything with it, then that, not that it wasn't beneficial for them personally, but it doesn't have much of a lasting impact. And if I only have 2 years to work in this place, I might as well do something that's going to continue to improve the lives of those in my community once I leave.
I like that. Yeah.
Kind of, that same principle could be applied in our own school system, or should be. Because that seems like what we try to do here is like, we think we can provide this, like, the same education to, all, thousands of kids across the school district, and it's just not possible. Right. They're not all going to get the same education. It's just not
going to.
You can say the same words in the same way to every child, and they're not all going to get the same out of it. Right. It's just not possible. Yeah. Developmentally, it's not possible.
Well, what about you, Josh? Same idea. If there was one experience that you don't think you'd forget.
Well, I mean, I was going to say something about just kind of the overall, when you're around people that have gone through so much trauma, but still at the end of the day, like, have so much optimism and, like, still want to celebrate life. Because there's, like, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the negativity of a place where so many negative things happen. Because the first thing I thought when you said that, like, the thing that I'll never forget is the night before we were leaving our site, Katy and I, there was a family that was visiting, and this small boy was sick, like, with the family. It was like, I don't know, was he 4 years old, 3 or 4? Not very big.
Very small.
Very small child, but could walk on his own, but wasn't walking because he was sick. And then, they were visiting the family that we were living with, and he was, obviously he was sick, and asked what was wrong. He had malaria, which is really common for small children to get malaria, but it's extremely dangerous. And the small boy started having a seizure, like, right in front of us. And what happens when a child gets malaria, what's really common is that their body's temperature spikes, and they have a fever so high that their body literally goes into seizure. They call them malarial seizures. And his eyes rolling in the back of his head, and all they do is, like, they like brought some water and trying to, like, sprinkle this water on, trying to get him to come out of this seizure. And then, they take him off. Like, it's like getting dark. It's like this really, it was getting dark, and like they're carrying this like lifeless form of this kid like off into the shadows, like trying to find him some help. And then we found out the next day that he had died. And that was that always hits me.
Yeah,
because we take in this country we take for granted that you have somewhere to take your child, and they don't have that over there.
Right.
But that being said, like, you know, that's something I'll never forget, because it reminds me every day of like being grateful for where I am here, like what we have in our country.
Yeah.
But also like to appreciate what we have, and to realize that other places are striving for that, and not to, and it should be our duty as global citizens to help others attain what we have.
For sure.
And it makes me, you know, I used to be a lot more not combative. I like to complain. You know, everyone loves to complain. That seems to be human nature. And it's a lot of times. And before I left, I was very critical of a lot of things about our culture, our society, our government. And after that experience, I realized that, you know what, maybe it's not so bad where we're at. Maybe we shouldn't complain so much about what we have and think we should have more and more of.
Right.
And maybe we should learn to appreciate and be grateful for what we have, because what we have is we have and live in the best country in the history of the world. We can talk all day and night about what things could be better about it,
for
you
sure.
know, and fixing the failures of the past. But in the moment now,
right.
I mean, there's just no way you could compare.
Yeah.
And so taken away from those experiences over there, coming back here, overall, like personality wise, and even my outlook, I'm a little bit more conservative when it comes to wanting, classic progressive conservative values: progress for the sake of progress, progressive for the sake of progress. And sometimes I learned after being over there, like those places actually do need progress.
For sure.
And like you can actually get measurable progress, but like you come back here, progress for the sake of progress, if you don't know where you want to go or what you're going to change, you better not change something that's already working, because what you change it to may not work.
Sure.
And after living in a place where it was borderline anarchy, with not a lot of rules and regulations, it's very much kind of like a Wild West situation most places.
Sometimes it crossed the borderline into complete anarchy.
And sometimes it was complete anarchy. You know, anarchy is not very... anarchy leads to like our basic animal instincts coming out. Okay. And I just, I saw a lot more of that than I would want to see again. And so that's kind of something I took away from.
Right.
Order. We talked about order versus chaos, right? Sometimes you don't want to be too much of either or is not good. You need to be on that boundary. Right. And a place like that is definitely more towards the chaos side, and they need that order to come in and help structure, their lives, provide that infrastructure, even, and not even just metaphorically or allegorically, but actually literally infrastructure and capacity building. They literally need it. Yeah, they literally need that structure. I mean, I think I'm optimistic. I think all of Africa is just exploding right now in a good way. Not like Middle East exploding, but like literally like infrastructure and economies are all coming up. Africa is going to be booming. Yeah, developmentally wise, and it's good. For a lot of the suffering the people over there have had for so long. It's good to see some actual progress. Right on.
Well, guys, I appreciate you sharing a lot of your story, and I know there's a lot more. Like, I feel like I still have so many questions and things that we could unpack.
Yeah, and like I told you, like it's not necessarily we enjoy talking about it, but I've been surprised by how few people actually want to talk about it, and so it's more than happy to come. Our third goal business is to take what we've learned and bring it back to America, and this is absolutely part of the Peace Corps primary 3 goals, and this is goal 3 business.
Goal 3 for sure. Well, I want the audience to know that if they have any questions for Josh and Katy about their experience, feel free to email or leave a message, and we will definitely have you guys back sometime in the future to talk some more.
Awesome. Thank you, Lance.
All right.